evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading some articles out of History magazine. And we have a theme this time. We're going to be reading some articles about ancient Egypt. These articles were picked by my channel members, in particular All the Happy Squirrels, Nebulous Wisp, and Ashna LM. Thank you so much. If you would like to participate in future History magazine videos, you can join my channel membership by clicking the join button down below or the link in the description box if you're not on a computer. It is only 99 cents a month. I've made it as cheap as possible. I got a notification saying that's too low, but I don't want to charge you an arm and a leg. I know this kind of thing is not affordable for everyone, so I made it as cheap as I could at 99 cents a month, just pretty much $1 per month. You get lots and lots of extra just voice-only content, soft-spoken and whispered. You get behind-the-scenes videos. You get lots of extra goodies during the live trivia nights, like custom emojis. And you get to pick History magazine articles. So if you want to join the fun little club we have there, I would love to have you. But let's get started. We are going to start off with this issue. We are going to be talking about the Rosetta Stone. We put these aside. And let me find the article here. Here we go. We are going to be reading about Champollion, hieroglyphic hero. I forgot. I just remembered. I've seen the Rosetta Stone. I have a picture of me next to the Rosetta Stone. I meant to pull it out of my photo albums before this video. You'll just have to take my word for it. Anyway, let's get started with the article. The paper presented before the Académie de Grenoble in eastern France in 1806 was noteworthy for two reasons. First, the author was only 16 years old, and second, the astonishingly erudite teenager made a very bold claim. He believed the ancient language of Egypt lived on in the form of the African language Coptic. Although his assertion would not turn out to be quite correct, as Coptic is not identical to ancient Egyptian but derived from it, the young scholar's insights would later contribute to the solution of one of the greatest scholarly mysteries of the 19th century. The young scholar was Jean-François Champollion, who was born in Figeac in southern France in 1790. The French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte formed the background to his childhood. Champollion's father, a book dealer, had a serious drinking problem. It was his elder brother, Jacques-Joseph, who encouraged and supported him. Champollion discovered ancient languages and became familiar with Greek, Latin, Amharic, which is a Semitic language from Ethiopia, Chinese, and Coptic. Riddle of the Rosetta Stone. Champollion's fascination with Coptic would one day come into play because of an object discovered far away during his childhood. In 1799, the year after Napoleon invaded Egypt, French soldiers repairing a fort near Al-Rashid, known to the Italians in French as Rosette, noticed that some of the stones in the structure were engraved in hieroglyphs. They had likely been robbed from more ancient structures to build the newer ones. One of the fragments, a sharp-eyed officer noted, featured hieroglyphs as well as a second text block in Greek, and then a third, unidentified script, now known as Demotic text. The ability to read and write hieroglyphs waned with the advent of the Christian period in Egypt, and finally disappeared with the decline of hieroglyphic writing at the end of the 4th century CE. Deciphering them was a burning ambition of the late 18th century scholars. The newly founded French-operated Institut d'Egypte was notified of the stone. On September 15, 1799, the Courrier de l'Egypte noted that if the Greek script turned out to be a translation of the hieroglyphs, this extraordinary stone would perhaps provide the key to crack the hieroglyphic code. Before the find could be moved to France, however, Napoleon's forces were defeated by the British, and the Rosetta Stone was taken to England, where it would form the early core of the Egyptian collection of the British Museum. Translations of the Greek inscription of the Rosetta Stone identified it as a decree issued by Ptolemy V Epiphanes, who died in 108 BCE. The Ptolemaic kings, descended from the Greek-speaking conquerors of Egypt in the 4th century BCE, used Greek, while hieroglyphs were reserved for temples and priests. Sorry, a wire just flew off my microphone and hit me in the face. Sorry if you heard that. The race was now on for scholars from different countries to use the Greek text to begin the process of identifying elements in the corresponding hieroglyphic texts. Translating them would unlock Egyptian civilization and its knowledge. The names of the king were identified in the hieroglyphs by English scholar Thomas Young. In France, meanwhile, scholar Antoine Isaac Sylvestre de Sacy and Johann Åkerblad, a Swedish diplomat, correctly identified the phonetic signs in kings' and queens' names in cartouches, which is the oval form that contained royal names, on the Rosetta Stone and other texts. With my California accent, I can't say texts. We say texts. Anyway, texts. Parisian portraits. In 1807, Sylvestre de Sacy was assigned a new pupil, the 17-year-old Champollion, who had moved from Grenoble to Paris. It would have been an exciting time for the young student. The French capital was awash with Egyptian artifacts from Napoleon's campaigns, and the publication of the Deciphering de l'Egypte was underway, with many drawings of the inscribed monuments and objects. Champollion was able to satisfy his obsession with Coptic by poring over numerous texts, which had been brought to Paris from the Vatican Library in Rome. In 1815, he produced a Coptic dictionary, which he managed to present to Napoleon before his defeat at Waterloo. Although written in mostly Greek-derived letters, Coptic retained some of the linguistic structures and vocabulary of the ancient language, and Champollion was convinced that his thorough knowledge of Coptic would be the key to cracking hieroglyphs. Already well-versed in Young's researches, Champollion studied the Rosetta inscriptions and those on an obelisk from Falaise. This obelisk, which had been taken from Egypt to Kingston Lacy in England, also had bilingual inscriptions in Greek and hieroglyphs. Despite key advances, Champollion and other scholars still could not explain what hieroglyphs actually said. Earlier scholars suggested the pictures stood for what they showed: owls, bees, bread, gods, building, boats. But translations based on this principle produced gibberish. Åkerblad, Sylvestre de Sacy, Young, and Champollion had identified the basic single-sounding phonetic signs, but this approach left many more signs unaccounted for, suggesting that the language was not written using a simple alphabet. Champollion's breakthrough is celebrated as one of history's great light bulb moments. It occurred on September 14th, 1822, when he finally deciphered the name Ramses in a hieroglyphic text from the Abu Simbel temple complex built by Ramses II, or Ramses the Great. Champollion realized the name was formed by a combination of figurative, symbolic, and phonetic all at once. Filled with joy, he cried, "Je tiens le fer! I've got it." Days later, he wrote his Lettre à Monsieur Dacier, the secretary of the Académie Royale des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres in Paris, with a list of 25 confirmed phonetic signs in Demotic script and hieroglyphs. The word Ramses is a good example of the complexity of the system whose workings Champollion had laid bare. It is written as Ra, Mes, Su. The word Ra in hieroglyphs and Coptic means sun. Mes is both a sound sign and a meaning sign or ideogram. Mes meant give birth to or created, a verb, and Su means him, a pronoun. Signs therefore played different roles in hieroglyphs. They were not all purely symbolic or phonetic representations. Phonetic signs could stand for 1, 2, or 3 sounds, while other signs were homophones, different signs for the same sounds. The 1822 breakthrough, exactly 200 years ago, this came out in 2022, was a remarkable beginning to Champollion's formidable contribution to studies in ancient Egyptian writing. Although Champollion owed much to the Rosetta Stone, his work with other texts, his peerless knowledge of Coptic and other Semitic languages, and his lifelong dedication to his studies gave him the edge over his English rivals. Father of Egyptology. Toward the end of his life, Champollion left the libraries where he had spent decades of patient research to see the inscriptions in situ. Beginning in August 1828, his 16-month tour of Egypt reached the second cataract of the Nile, just south of the Abu Simbel complex. Champollion recorded his adventures in a stream of letters to his brother Jacques-Joseph. Cramming the letters with sketches, he described his pleasure in donning Egyptian dress, his tour of Abu Simbel in baking heat, as well as the preparations he witnessed for a dish of crocodile meat. In terms of colonialist behavior, Champollion was of his time. Despite his reverence for Egyptian artifacts, he nevertheless ordered that a wall panel from the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings be taken back to France. On returning to his native land in late 1829, Champollion's health took a turn for the worse. Scholars believe the strain of his travels in Egypt led to repeated bouts of illness for the rest of his life. He died in Paris in 1832 at age 41. His 1824 Précis du système hiéroglyphique des anciens Égyptiens contains 400 pages of discussion and a separate volume of plates with words, signs, and sign groups in hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and Coptic, and was the greatest contribution to hieroglyphic research of any scholar at that time. Champollion's opening up of hieroglyphics enabled Egyptologists to eavesdrop on the thoughts of the ancient Egyptians and to understand in ever greater depth the religious and social composition of their world. So let's dive into the next article, where an artifact that became translated thanks to the Rosetta Stone revealed some facts about possibly the very first pharaoh of Egypt, and that would be Narmer, the first pharaoh of Egypt. So here you can see part of the Narmer palette, which has a lot of people's heads chopped off there. But we know most about Narmer, I believe, from the Narmer palette. Well, that's a really good map of the Nile. Let's read about it. Let me squish this down a bit so we can read. 5,000 years ago, there was no single nation of Egypt, at least not as it exists today. There were and had been for thousands of years two lands, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. There are millennia-old inscriptions on ceramics and depictions of leaders from each kingdom that show two distinct entities with different sets of traditions. Prior to unification, depictions of kings showed different regalia. Rulers of Upper Egypt wore a tall white crown called a headget, while in Lower Egypt, kings donned a short red crown called a deshret. Around 3100 BCE, a king of Upper Egypt, known as Narmer, changed all that by incorporating the lands west of the fertile triangular Nile Delta region into his own kingdom, which spanned the lush Nile Valley area in the south, roughly from what is Cairo today to Lake Nasser. Let me fix my headphones real quick. He created a united Egypt, the world's first great territorial state. When the two lands united, it marked not only the beginnings of a political state, but also the origins of a great cultural one. Beginning with Narmer, Egypt began developing its own distinctive visual style, one that would echo through the ages as the iconography and symbols embraced by Narmer and his successors took hold. These symbols became tools used by pharaohs from Khufu to Hatshepsut to Ptolemy XII to convey power, strength, and unity for millennia. Kings and crowns. Works of art are remarkable in their ability to preserve moments in time, as the events of the day make an impact on the people who endured them. Records from Narmer's time are rare, but one object that survived through the ages provides a window into the changes that took place during Narmer's reign. It is a stone palette, similar to ones commissioned by various kings of Upper Egypt at the end of the pre-dynastic period. Made from gray siltstone and sculpted with images of gods, beasts, and kings, these tablets were used to grind and mix cosmetic pigments. Some were designed for practical use, while others were ceremonial, and others were deposited in temples as votive offerings. Narmer commissioned such a votive siltstone palette. British archaeologists James Quibble and Frederick Green discovered it in the ruins of a temple in Hierakonpolis, now Nekhen, south of Luxor, in 1897 to 1898. Now popularly known as the Narmer palette, the shield-shaped object dates to circa 3200 to 3000 BCE, and it appears the ruler consecrated the palette to the temple of the falcon-headed god Horus, symbol of cosmic and political power. Unlike the mask of Tutankhamun, which has traveled the world, the Narmer palette has never left Egypt. Today, the 25-inch tall artifacts, which feature some of the world's earliest hieroglyphs, can be seen in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The Narmer palette was made from a single piece of siltstone and carved on both sides. Both the front and back feature depictions of the king. It is the earliest monumental representation of a pharaoh found to date. On one side, Narmer wears a headget of Upper Egypt, grasps an enemy by the hair, and raises a mace to strike. On the other side, the ruler sports a deshret from Lower Egypt, as he surveys his fallen foes. It is the first time that an Egyptian king is depicted wearing each crown on the same work of art. Egyptologists see the appearance of both crowns as evidence of Narmer's creation of a unified Egypt under his rule as the active promotion of the feet. Here's the second side of the Narmer palette, by the way. Pretty cool, I think. The pharaoh who followed would build on Narmer's use of royal iconography and change it. The crowns of the two lands would eventually be combined into one, called a peshent, also referred to as a sekhmeti. This double crown visually united the lands upon the head that ruled them. The falcon-headed god Horus is often depicted wearing a peshent. Pharaoh Den, who ruled circa 2900 BCE, is currently believed to be the first depicted wearing the double crown, thus completing the metamorphosis, two lands into one, begun by Narmer generations before him. It may seem counterintuitive, but the concept of two lands did not disappear with this first dynasty or any of the others that followed. Rather, the dual nature of the Egyptian kingdom was emphasized, as duality was an important tenet of Egyptian culture, including the throne itself. Later First Dynasty pharaohs would embrace the title ruler of the two lands, and following pharaohs would continue to use the title through the ages. Keeping the identities of the two lands distinct from each other was a way of giving the new political order a divine sanction. Central to ancient Egyptian belief were two opposite and necessary forces, Ma'at, or order, and Isfet, and chaos, the static and dynamic forces that governed the universe. Balance was desired, and order and chaos must coexist in order for equilibrium to be achieved. Power poses. The palette also reveals the evolution of Egyptian visual style. Prior to Narmer, influences from outside Egypt made their way into works of art. Some seem merely decorative, like the rosette, an Elamite motif used to identify the king's sandal-bearer, who stands just to his left on the front of the palette. On the reverse, two serpopards, mythical felines with long serpentine necks, form a circular compartment with their intertwined necks. These creatures are also found in ancient Elamite art. I think it shows that in another page. Other Mesopotamian influences were the depiction of leaders as actual beasts, fearsome creatures like lions, bulls, hawks, or scorpions that destroy cities and crush enemies. Narmer is clearly shown twice on the palette in human form, and some scholars believe he shows up twice as a beast king. On the front he may be the falcon, whose human arms perch above an enemy's head, while on the reverse, in the lowest section of the chevron, he may be a bull charging through city walls and trampling a helpless foe. This beast king iconography largely disappears after Narmer's reign, although some vestiges of it remained. Pharaohs might be shown in human form, but wearing a bull's tail, such as Den, the fourth pharaoh to rule after Narmer. So here's, this is the reverse of the Narmer plate. Anyway, so here you can see the serpentine necks of these creatures here. The beast king trampling somebody, probably. Pretty cool. I don't know if they talk about it in here, but this is where they would put the cosmetics to dab. That's an actual palette, right? The smiting tableau on the front of the Narmer palette stood the test of time in Egyptian art. The positioning of Narmer's body, with one upraised hand holding a mace while the other clutches a helpless enemy, okay, so that is the front, can be found in almost every era of pharaonic Egypt. On the walls of his temple at Abu Simbel, Ramses II strikes down his enemies in Narmeric fashion, while more than 1,000 years later, Ptolemy XII is depicted on the Temple of Horus at Edfu in the exact same pose. What's in a name? Narmer's name is written on the palette on both sides. A combination of the symbols for a catfish, Nar, and a chisel, Mer, appear at the top. Early Egyptologists, however, were not convinced that he was definitively the first pharaoh. Royal records from Narmer's era are scarce, and many of the existing ones are incomplete. While there are several kings' lists that record the names of pharaohs and their successors, intact ones that extend all the way back to that early dynastic era are few. Let me see the picture real quick. Can we see the catfish? I think it's up here. Catfish and chisel. Narmer. It's up there too. That's right. It said it was on both sides, didn't they? Anyway. Two of the most important were found in the 1980s by researchers from the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo. They uncovered 2 cylinder seal impressions in the tomb of the Pharaoh Den. These seals, still the oldest documented kings' lists to date, list rulers and successors of the First Dynasty. One seal dates to the middle of the First Dynasty and names 6 rulers. The other seal dates closer to the end of the First Dynasty and names 8 leaders. Both lists begin with Narmer. Royal lists created millennia later during the New Kingdom have created the confusion. One of the most incomplete is the Abydos king list, engraved upon the wall of the mortuary temple of Seti I. Engraved on the wall, Seti and his heir Ramses, the future Ramses II, face rows of cartouches bearing the names of Egypt's past pharaohs. On this list, however, the first king listed is Menes, not Narmer. I think that's what this picture was. Yeah. So this is a cartouche, circular here, with all the names. So this is a king list. Isn't that cool? Moving on. Did not begin with Narmer. The Turin Papyrus is another king list from the same era as Seti I. There's actually another article in another magazine I have about the Turin Papyrus, so we'll get to that another day, but moving on. Rather than being engraved in stone, it is cursive hieratic script, written on papyrus, and is one of the most accurate and complete king lists, covering the 1st through the 19th dynasties. It too names the first king as Menes and not Narmer. Writing centuries later, classical authors such as the 5th century BCE Greek historian Herodotus wrote of Menes rather than Narmer as the unifier of Egypt. A 3rd century BCE priest in the temple at Heliopolis, Manetho, was an author of another trusted source that also lists Menes as the first king. Egyptologists tried to reconcile the use of these two names. Perhaps they were two different people, one who unified Egypt and another who ruled after him. Or Menes could have been a composite figure, cobbled together from the lives and deeds of other early kings. English Egyptologist Flinders Petrie came up with the most widely accepted theory. Narmer and Menes were the same person. Narmer was the name of the first pharaoh of the First Dynasty, and Menes was an honorific title meaning he who endures. Life and death. Exact details about Narmer's life remain difficult to pin down. It is believed that he hailed from Hierapolis. He is credited with organizing his new unified kingdom into some 40 regions called nomes. He married, and his royal wife's name was Nithotep, after her creator goddess Nith, not sure. Narmer also built a temple dedicated to the creator god Ptah at Memphis, another important ancient Egyptian city. Details of Narmer's death are hazy. Classical historians, writing millennia after he died, attributed it to being carried off by the hippopotamus. Some Egyptologists post that it could have been a figure of speech and not a literal hippo, but the cause of death remains an open question. Narmer chose to locate his tomb in the south and would be interred at what would become known as the Abydos Royal Cemetery, where his ancestors and his descendants would also be buried. Narmer's tomb is small, comprising 2 underground chambers that follow a pre-dynastic tradition of funerary architecture, a style that would end with him. Both Narmer's widow and his son, Raha, would be buried in larger tombs. The pharaohs who followed would be buried in increasingly monumental structures, a tradition that reached its pinnacle in the grandiose pyramids erected by the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. And here you can see the royal tombs of Abydos. Or any other palettes. Isn't that so cool? That's really neat. That's where this article ends, though. Let's go to the last article. So we're going to jump much farther into Egyptian history and talk about Akhenaten and his very complex temple, adoring Amen, the sacred rituals at Karnak. That's what it looks like today. Every day at dawn, more than 3,000 years ago, at the height of Egypt's new kingdom, the high priest of Amen, also called the first prophet, bathed in the sacred lake of the temple of Karnak at Thebes. Then, followed by servants carrying trays of food, he would approach the Naos, the shrine containing the statue of Amen, Egypt's state god. It was a tense moment. The god could strike down the high priest. To avoid this fate, he would deliver a series of prayers, humbling himself before the god and praising Amen's name. These daily rituals continued for millennia in the hallowed halls of Karnak. This sacred space occupied the northern part of the ancient city of Thebes. The modern name of Karnak is derived from the Arabic term meaning fortified town, but the ancient Egyptians called the site Ipet Iset, meaning chosen of places. Dominated by the temple complexes of Amen, his consort Mut, and their son Khons, Karnak spreads across roughly 250 acres, comprising one of the largest religious sites anywhere in the world. A new dawn. Beginning in the 1800s, excavations at Karnak revealed a rich repository of 2,000 years of Egyptian history. A shrine to the god Amen was first built at the site around 2000 BCE. More than a century later, Pharaoh Senwosret I built a Jubilee shrine there, a sign of the site's increasing significance. Nevertheless, it took a major political shift to exalt Amen, the most important god of the Egyptian pantheon. In the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, a long period of disunity came to an end in Egypt. The Theban pharaoh Ahmose I expelled an occupying people known as the Hyksos around 1539 BCE, reuniting Upper and Lower Egypt under the same crown for the first time in a century. He became the first king of the so-called 18th dynasty who ruled their kingdom from Thebes. As political and spiritual power were closely linked in ancient Egypt, Thebes also became a spiritual center focused on the worship of Amen. One powerful pharaoh after another left their mark on the temple complex at Karnak, and sacred rituals developed to ensure divine favor for the pharaoh and the protection of the state. One of the most important rites was a procession centered on the sacred boat, or bark, of Amun. A female pharaoh, Hatshepsut, created major structures there that served as both her living quarters and a shrine for her sacred barks. Her heir, Thutmose III, built the temple's sacred lake as well as reliefs depicting plants brought back from his imperial expansion into Syria. During the 19th century and the 13th century BC, the 19th dynasty in the 13th century BCE, more massive monuments rose to the west of Hatshepsut's complex, crowned by the mighty Great Hypostyle Hall with its 134 columns. These works were begun by Seti I and completed by his son Ramses II. A living temple. Amun first emerged as a lesser god to a Theban creation deity. His name means the hidden one, and his divine dominion was rather open-ended. Historians theorize that this enabled him, there's lots of pictures here, they're really beautiful, but this enabled him to embody more aspects of creation and absorb different divine characteristics. This ability to adapt allowed him to rise to the head of the local pantheon in Thebes, where he was worshipped with his consort Mut and their son Khons. As he acquired greater national power, Amun was incorporated into a parallel triad consisting of the solar deity Ra, with whom he is often combined as Amun-Ra, and the creator god Ta. Nurtured through the dark days of the Hyksos occupation of Lower Egypt, his cult rose in tandem with the fortunes of Thebes at the dawn of the New Kingdom. As the Theban pharaohs became increasingly powerful, Amun gained sufficient stature to become Egypt's supreme deity. By the end of the New Kingdom, several thousand people worked at Karnak, consisting of an elite priesthood and servants. Some of the rituals were performed during annual rituals such as the Opet festival, in which the bark of Amun was taken upriver to the temple of Luxor. Other rituals had to be performed daily and were thought essential for maintaining cosmic order. These included the daily offering ritual, detailed in the papyri manuscripts from the 10th century BCE, now held by the Egyptian Museum of Berlin. Although the rites described in the papyri date to circa 1539 BCE, they are likely to be similar to those performed in the time of Seti I and Ramses II in the 13th century BCE, when Egypt was at the height of its imperial power. The Berlin papyri recount how, having broken the clay seal, the first prophet opened the naus containing the statue of Amun, prostrated himself, and kissed the ground. Then he reassured the god that nothing had been stolen from him and no mischief had occurred. Hail to you, Amun-Ra, Lord of the thrones of the two lands. I have done nothing with your secretions. I have not removed your dignity. I have not shaped your skin for another god. The priests would present trays of food to Amun, including such offerings as fresh fruit, poultry and beef, legumes, breads, water, milk, wine, beer, and honey. Amun, it was believed, later consumed the food's essence. Each day the statue would be adorned with garments. In the mornings, priests would remove the prior day's clothing and then replace them with the new attire. Reliefs on the walls of the temple at Karnak include depictions of the statue's clothes in the form of linen bindings of different colors, white as an emblem of purity, blue representing water and sky, green for health and vitality, and red for blood and strength, as well as the linen robe, the priest applied makeup and perfume and adorned the statue with gold necklaces, pectorals, and bracelets from Karnak's treasury, as well as the divine insignia. After Amun had been fed and clothed, and the proper prayers uttered, the naos would be resealed. Facing forward so as not to turn his back to Amun, the first prophet walked backward toward the exit, sweeping the floor as he went to erase any footprints he may have left. The priests versus pharaohs. The cult of Amun had risen with the New Kingdom and would later factor in its decline as tensions grew among different powerful factions. Following Ramses II and his immediate heirs and successors, succession crises weakened the New Kingdom and Theban rule. Part of this process was hastened by a power struggle between the pharaohs and the Amun priesthood at Karnak, who started to intervene more and more in the secular affairs of state. After Ramses XI died in 1075 BCE, Egypt entered a 400-year era of instability, now called the Third Intermediate Period. During the 21st dynasty, power shifted to the city of Tanis in northern Egypt. Pharaohs would, nevertheless, continue to build new structures at Karnak. The last was raised in the 7th century BCE by Pharaoh Taharka of the 25th dynasty. Even after this last major addition, the worship of Amun would endure for centuries more at the ancient temple. The cult would only formally end in the 4th century CE, when Roman emperors ordered the closing of pagan temples, bringing to an end a pattern of worship that had lasted for more than 2 millennia. Wow, are there any other pictures? No, but it is neat. I love this little walkway here, all lit up nowadays. But are these like crocodile-headed lions or something? No, they were rams. I think I'm thinking of a different temple. I think I said, who did I mention at the start of this? Did I say Akhenaten? I did not mean to say Akhenaten. Akhenaten was not about Amun-Ra. It's like the wrong pharaoh. I'm thinking of the wrong temple, but it's still a very, very incredible place, isn't it? Look at all the hieroglyphs, all the columns. There's the lake. Kind of like a diagram of what it would have looked like. The gateway is the Apostyle Hall. Then the Festival Hall here. Number 4 is, I can read. This is the Great Apostyle Hall. Where's number 2? Resting places. Okay. The hall here. And the inner sanctum here, that's where the statue of Amun was. And this is the festival hall, so this is the great court. I promise I can read. I think I just demonstrated how I read. I just can't read numbers. So this is the statue. That's incredible. I don't know, when they described like a statue, I figured like a little miniature, but it's like a life-size statue. Is that not incredible? Adoring Amun. And that's what it looks like today, that big diagram I showed you. There's the entrance and all that. Incredible. So that's where we're going to end it tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good